Hello, this is Dwight Mutonono, also known as Nyarazi, also known as Mutos, and welcome to the Connection Desk. And we're continuing with our study on the book of Acts. We're in Acts chapter 24, and I'm going to go today from verse 10 through to 22. In the previous session, we had talked about Paul being before the Sanhedrin and the defense, or rather the accusations, the charges against Paul were presented by a lawyer called Tertullus, and the Jewish authorities who had come with the lawyer actually endorsed those charges against Paul. In today's session, Paul responds to the charges. So we are reading from verses 10 through to 22. When the governor motioned for him to speak, Paul replied, "I know that for a number of years you have been a judge over this nation, so I gladly make my defense. You can easily verify that no more than 12 days ago, I went up to Jerusalem to worship. My accusers did not find me arguing with anyone at the temple or stirring up a crowd in the synagogues or anywhere else in the city. And they cannot prove to you the charges they are now making against me. However, I admit that I worship the God of our fathers as a follower of the way, which they call a sect. I believe everything that agrees with the law and that is written in the prophets, and I have the same hope in God as these men, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. So I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man. After an absence of several years, I came to Jerusalem to bring my people gifts for the poor and to present offerings. I was ceremonially clean when they found me in the temple courts doing this. There was no crowd with me, nor was I involved in any disturbance. But there are some Jews from the province of Asia who ought to be here before you and bring charges if they have anything against me. Or these who are here should state what crime they found in me when I stood before the Sanhedrin. Unless it was this one thing I shouted as I stood in their presence. It is concerning the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you today." Then Felix, who was well acquainted with the way, adjourned the proceedings. "When Lysias the commander comes," he said, "I will decide your case." Okay. Paul did not flatter. So he started off as a statement of fact, and he said, "For a number of years you have been a judge of this nation, so I gladly make my defense." This was a fact. Felix had been a judge for a number of years, and you are saying, "I acknowledge that, and I'm sure that you are well acquainted with the issues around Judea, and you are sufficiently conversant with them to be able to make a determination of this case." And Paul did not have a lawyer to represent him. He was confident. He was accomplished in terms of his rhetoric and argumentation, presentation of argument, to the extent that he did not feel it was necessary in this case to have a lawyer to represent him. He was thankful for the opportunity to have a just hearing to his case, and he was appealing to Felix to uphold the existing judicial structures and systems so that he could have a fair hearing. So that's really what he was doing. He was saying, "Felix, I want you to hear me out. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm hoping that I'll get a fair trial." And then he presents his case. The accusation was he was a troublemaker, stirring up riots among the Jews all over the world. Well, his response was, 12 days before before this trial and everything, he had gone up to Jerusalem to worship. And witnesses could attest to his movements. They could attest that he had been in Jerusalem and he was there to worship. And he had not had enough time to organize an uprising. And he was not arguing with anyone at the time that this whole situation started. And he was not stirring up trouble in any way. He was minding his own business. And he said he rejected the charges against him, said they had no proof that they had done what they said. They could not cite an instance of him instigating a riot, and he was accused of being a ringleader of the Nazarene sect. That was the second charge. And his response was, no, I'm not a ringleader of the Nazarene sect, as they are implying that it's a sect that is different from the Jewish faith. His response was that he was a worshipper of the God of our fathers, as a follower of the way. So he's saying, I'm a worshipper of God just like them, and what they call a sect, it is a Jewish expression of worship, and everything in the way was a continuation of the Jewish faith, and they could not prove the charges that he was starting a new religion, or an illicit religion. And where were the witnesses to desecrating the temple? So he's asking, okay, produce the witnesses that I did that to desecrate the temple. And he says, the thing that I hope for is the resurrection of the dead, and the teaching that there will be a judgment of both the righteous and the wicked. And this would be a point of contention in the Sanhedrin, and he knew that. He had created it or he had brought it up as a point of contention, but he also is just putting it into this argument. So his argument was that the problem they had with Christianity was the claim that Jesus rose from the dead. So now he begins to say the real issue here is the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. And he begins to talk about how he kept the law, and he was consistent with the Jewish law, which makes it very clear to Felix that this is not a criminal issue that the Roman Empire should be concerned about, but it is more an issue of the worship in this area of Judea. He mentions that he had come to Judea with a gift for the believers in there, and it was a major motivation for the trip. So he's basically saying, I came here, I wasn't trying to stir up anything, I came here to worship. And he emphasized that he was currently ceremonially unclean, that he was ceremonially clean when they came. He was in the temple, he was doing everything according to Jewish ceremony. There was no crowd, there was no disturbance. And then he says, there are some Jews from Asia who caused this disturbance. And he says they are the ones who should explain why they caused the disturbance. And what he then did in that is that he reversed the charges to say, okay, I did not instigate anything. If there's anyone who instigated a situation here, it is the people who came from Asia. And where are they? So he's now asking questions of where are the people who brought up or who caused all these riots and all these problems. And he then is now saying this court is not properly constituted because the ones who caused this whole issue are not there. And the only problem he was aware of was the fact that he talked about the resurrection to the Sanhedrin. So he's now framed this whole thing as an issue of the Jewish faith, and it had nothing to do with the Roman Empire. And then he ends his defense. Now Felix had a problem because Lysias and Paul's testimony was not compatible with the testimony of the lawyer and the Jews. The accusations amounted to Paul being a threat to the Roman peace, a seditious person, treasonous, who deserved the death sentence. the testimony from Paul and Lysias was that it was a matter of Jewish religion and laws, not a matter of sedition. And then Paul was speaking as a Roman citizen. So now Paul, what he was doing now was he was saying, I'm a Roman citizen and I'm under trial for trying to instigate treason against Rome. But as a Roman citizen, he is being just accused by the Jews of breaking Jewish laws, if you want, or Jewish religious issues. And instead of deciding this right there and then, because now what Paul actually had done is he had said, okay, Lysias and I, as Roman citizens, we are presenting our story. The lawyer and the Jews, they are presenting their story as the Jewish people. And as a Roman governor, the testimony of a Roman citizen and a Roman commander was stronger than the testimony of the Jewish authorities. So what Paul had done now is he had now made it a Roman issue against the Jewish people there. So instead of deciding right there and then and dismissing the case, which is what Felix ought to have done, because there was not enough, basically it was not properly constituted. There was not enough evidence to say that Paul was starting an illicit religion or that he was treasonous in any way. And he would have needed to just close this thing and say, no case dismissed. But Felix was a politician and he made a political decision because he knew that if he did something that the Jewish authorities would not be happy with, it could actually affect his ability to govern in that area. So remember that when we're talking about the Sanhedrin, we're talking about chief priests who had a lot of political connections and could cause someone like Felix a lot of trouble. So that's what we then see in this story, that he then made a decision to delay proceedings and said, I will come back to this when I hear from Lysias, and the court is adjourned. We are waiting to hear from Lysias. And of course, Lysias' story, that's how he manages to get out of this story. And basically, as we will see a bit later on, he just delays and stalls, and Lysias never comes, or it doesn't seem, there's no record of him ever coming, and there's no record of this court being constituted again during the time of Felix. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next session. You're blessed and continue in God's favor.